Is it possible to play D&D without spending a dime? This week, I give you the resources you need to start your own D&D campaign without even having to open your wallet. Hello players and GMs, I am Reese and welcome to another video by Jetpack7. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to wish everyone a happy holiday season. Regardless of what you do or do not celebrate, I hope you all have a wonderful end of 2020 because I think we could all really use a happy ending to this year. That said, we all know this season can end up getting pretty expensive buying gifts for family and friends, but it's also the time when a lot of people end up getting into D&D because it is a fantastic time to buy someone their first book or their first set of dice or even the essential starting kit. But let's say that you're interested in getting into D&D and nobody has gotten you anything D&D related, but your bank account is still suffering from all the gifts you so generously bought for your family. If that is the case, then this video is very much for you. When I first started playing D&D, I literally did not own a single book, mini, battle map, not a thing. I actually worked at a place very close to a Barnes & Noble, and on breaks I would walk over there and read through the books and take notes that way. This was before I knew about any of these free resources available, and I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to use bookstores like a library, but anyway, it turns out there is a lot of stuff out there that Wizards of the Coast themselves and various third-party creators have created and put out totally for free. So in this video, I'm going to point you in the direction of some of the best resources available that will allow you to play D&D totally for free, or at least for very, very cheap. And of course, everything I mention will be linked in the description below. The most important thing, of course, is the rules. How do you play the game? Normally, you'd find these in the 3 core books, the Player's Handbook, or PHB, the Dungeon Master's Guide, or DMG, and the Monster Manual. However, if you're buying all 3 of those books, you're looking at a bundle that will cost you about $80 to $90. Wizards is aware that is expensive, so they made this nice little PDF of the basic rules. It is 180 pages of content that you can access on their website. They are the official rules, last updated in 2018, so relatively up to date. Not a whole lot has changed since then when it comes to the core rules, and it gives you a fair amount of content. It starts off with the same introductory stuff of how to play, running D&D, the kind of stuff you'd find in the beginning of the DMG or the PHB, and then jumps right into the actual rules. It gives you 4 races to play as well as 4 classes. It mentions backgrounds and equipment in the game, feats, multiclassing, and hits all the rules of travel, combat, skill checks, all that. If you're a new player, that may sound overwhelming, but it is laid out very intuitively, and if you give it a read, I think you'll be able to grasp it easily enough. That said, if it's overwhelming, that's great, because this is all free, which means you're getting a lot of information for literally $0, which we love to see. It even has Dungeon Master's tools at the end with nearly 50 pages of monsters to choose from, a basic guide to building encounters, and of course a few pages of magic items. They basically took the most important information from those 3 core books and collapsed them into one 180-page document. So obviously there's a ton more content out there if you're willing and able to pay for it, but this is a pretty great head start for a beginner. There is also another document available for free that many people may not know about because it isn't intended to be something consumed for content, rather to allow people to write 5th edition content using some of Wizards of the Coast's basic material called the SRD, or Systems Reference Document. This is a document they made so that creators could write and publish 5e content and use some of the classes, spells, and whatnot that have become so famous in D&D and guarantee that Wizards of the Coast won't, sue them for stealing their intellectual property. Regardless, it contains a lot of content that the basic rules do not, including some other classes, spells, and monsters. So it's just another resource you can use to pull content from without spending any money. Lastly, I'd like to mention the DM's Guild. This is one you can do for free, but I usually recommend people pay at least a little bit for this work. DM's Guild is a website where independent, amateur, and professional creators alike can post their work and have other people buy it. The reason it can be free is that many people post stuff on here and price it as a pay what you can item. So if you really like something but absolutely can't spare a few bucks, then you technically can download it for free. You might have to spend something, I'm not entirely sure. Either way, you can get a lot of stuff from DM's Guild, anything from adventures to new classes and subclasses for dirt cheap. But of course, if you can pay a little bit, I always recommend it because these people are often creating the stuff of their own accord, not being commissioned by a bigger company. That said, it can still be very cheap, and it is an awesome resource with ridiculously creative and smart people that will keep your table full of new and exciting content. Next, we need some dice. It is a classic pastime of D&D players to collect an absurd number of dice. I mean, like, really just way too many. Honestly, I don't even know how I got a lot of these, but I got them either way. That said, a set of dice will usually cost you anywhere between $5 and $15 depending on where you're getting it, and this video is about playing for free, so that just won't do. Fortunately, there are tons of dice rollers out there that will fill that gap without costing a penny. There are phone apps like Dice Roller, Dice, and RPG Simple Dice that will allow you to do it from the palm of your hand, as well as plenty of online dice rollers that work just as well. One method I personally recommend is actually using Roll20, which is a free online D&D platform. If you create a campaign on Roll20, you can invite all your players to it and you can use that to roll all your dice. All you do is type in what rolls you're trying to make and it will calculate it all for you. So obviously it doesn't give you the same satisfaction of rolling dice, but if free is what you're looking for, then this is a great option, especially for the mathematically challenged people like me. This is honestly a tool I've used at the table just to help speed up combat because it takes me a long time to add everything up and subtract all the health points, particularly once we get into higher level combat and I'm rolling a whole hell of a lot of dice. All this said, opening a brand new set of dice is the closest thing to opening gifts on Christmas, and the most basic Chessex set of dice I've seen usually are no more than $10. So if you can afford it, then I always recommend a physical set. Plus, it gives you a small, cheap way to support your local game store, which is always a huge bonus. Game stores want all the foot traffic they can get, especially since online D&D is becoming more and more prevalent, so I always prefer to get my stuff from them, even if it costs a couple extra bucks. The final thing you may be thinking you need for D&D are the all-important battle map and minis. If you've seen Critical Role, you've seen one of the most elaborate and expensive collections of battle maps and minis on the market. They have an absurd amount of stuff because, one, Matt Mercer has been playing D&D his entire life and slowly collecting things, and then they got even more when they got famous and sponsored by companies that make that stuff. So don't compare yourself to that setup because you won't have a good time. Now, if you want your setup to be totally cost-free, then really the only option is using theater of the mind, using your imagination. And while this may sound sad, I had actually grown rather accustomed to battle maps and minis because my friends have 3D printers, but when I ran my last campaign, I actually ran many of the encounters through theater of the mind, and I have to say, it was rather refreshing. Combat moved faster. The battle map was not limited by my really horrendous artistic capabilities. We weren't crunching numbers as much. It really allowed me the freedom to improvise in combat. The downside to that is remembering what creatures are where, and it can create a lack of clarity for the players because they aren't seeing what's in your head. And sometimes they may not know exactly which creature they're attacking. If you are particularly worried about that, then the next cheapest solution, which is one I used many times back in my very first campaign, is to go out, buy some graph paper, mark out some squares on it, and find something to use as creature tokens. I usually recommend using dice because it makes it easy to mark which monsters are which by placing the number of that monster face up. That way you can have Goblin 1, 2, 3, and 4 as D4s, with a couple Bugbears being D6s with 1 and 2 facing up, and it's perfectly clear who is who and who's attacking what. But if you don't have any dice to spare, I've also used coins, playing cards, though those don't fit in the squares quite as much, as mostly for positioning and combat, and whatever else I could find laying around my house. It actually wasn't until my last couple of years playing D&D that I actually started using minis, and though it was really nice and cool for everyone to have their own custom mini, it was absolutely not necessary and didn't add much at all to the quality of the game. Again, D&D is an expensive hobby only if you want it to be one. There are tons of free or extremely cheap resources out there for you to use that will allow you to have an absolutely incredible campaign with your friends. Every experienced DM and player in the world will tell you that what makes a game of D&D worthwhile is not the number of books you have or the quality of your minis or even how good your DM is at designing battle maps, thank God, but rather who is sitting at the table. You can play the simplest adventure ever written, and if you've got a group of good friends sitting around you, then it will be an awesome time, no matter how much money you've spent on stuff. I hope this video has helped out anyone looking to get started in the hobby. If you have any more questions about how to get started, please let me know in the comments, and I will be happy to lend my best advice. Happy holidays again, everyone. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you around.